Hello, my name is Carol May Whittick, Spiritual Life Coach. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Higher Energetic Resonance Inspirations. These are tools for your awakening. This week, we're exploring self-compassion. From Vironika Wilde, open the door, invite in depression, invite anxiety, invite self-hatred, invite shame. Hear their message, give them a hug. Accept their tirades as exaggerated mistruths typical of any upset person. Love your darkness and you shall know your light. And before we get into this episode, just a quick reminder that if you want to receive additional notes that will help you with your meditation, with your journaling for further spiritual exploration and inspiration, use the link in the show notes to join the Her Inspirations mailing list. And when you do that, you will also receive the free Embody Higher Energetic Resonance course, which runs daily for 6 days. So let's start. If you listened to last week's episode looked at radical self-honesty. And during that episode, one of the points that I highlighted was self-compassion. And thinking about it over the week, I felt that that particular point actually warranted its own episode. And the reason being is when it comes to being radically self-honest, if this is a new way of being with ourselves, if it's something that we're trying to do for the first time or the first few times, we can and could have a tendency to go way too hard in the opposite direction. So it's about finding a balance, because we can often be too hard on ourselves in berating ourselves and really picking up on our truths. So we don't want that radical self-honesty to go too radically too far. So what we want to do is embed the idea of compassion and be able to create an awareness of it and recognize when we need to bring that into what we're doing. And self-compassion is about nurturing our personal growth. It's about developing a sense of inner harmony. And when we're thinking about self-compassion, it's essential that we begin to treat ourselves gently instead of any self-criticism. Instead of looking at ourselves with an overly critical eye, look at the areas that we need to explore and grow without kind of digging into the fact that we have flaws and imperfections, but notice that there are areas that we can actually up-level with ourselves and do that with gentleness. Ultimately, what we want to do when we're practicing self-compassion is to treat ourselves with the same kindness we would offer a close friend, because ultimately we should be our own best friend first and foremost. And a thought leader in the area of self-compassion is psychologist Christine Neff. And she outlined 3 components of self-compassion. First being self-kindness, so the idea of being understanding with ourselves and being gentle with ourselves. Common humanity, so recognizing that it's a universal human experience to suffer. And then mindfulness is then finding a balance with our feelings and our experiences without over-identifying ourselves with them. And when she's talking about fierce self-compassion, a quote from Christine Neff is, "When we relate to ourselves with tender self-compassion, we care for and nurture ourselves. When we relate to ourselves with fierce self-compassion, we assert our autonomy and stand up for our rights." And when we're looking at self-compassion, sometimes it helps to look at what self-compassion is not. Some points that we can look at around this is self-compassion is not pity. So we're not going to become so immersed in our own problems and then we're kind of bleeding out to everyone and talking about how sad and how bad things are for us, because we have to also bear in mind that everyone is going through their own stuff. There are people that may have similar problems to us as well. So compassion is allowing ourselves to understand what it is that we're experiencing and realizing that in experiencing that and allowing ourselves to experience that, we're also getting an insight into the experiences, the feelings, the suffering of others. Self-compassion is not indulgence. It's not over-spoiling yourself. We need to make sure that we're treating ourselves well, but we need to find a balance. If you think about when you're practicing self-compassion, in the same way that you would treat a young child, there would be boundaries. You would be gentle, but you wouldn't be too soft. You wouldn't then validate the excuses that you make for not actually showing up in your life or doing the things that you want to do by coming up with crazy excuses because, you're giving yourself the there treatment. And also not facing up to your own responsibilities is not what self-compassion is about. Self-compassion is also not anything to do with self-esteem. So it's not you saying that I'm good, I'm better, I'm best within your own eyes. It's a leveled, loving experience. It's not berating yourself for being bad or over applauding yourself for being good. It's just seeing the beauty in what you are in all aspects, in all ways that you are. Questions that we can ask ourselves as well is then when we're looking at our life, and then even like following on from last week's episode when we were talking about radical self-honesty, is then noticing again, are there areas where I'm lacking in self-compassion? Are there areas where I'm being too hard on myself? Are there areas where I'm not actually holding myself to a standard? Because by allowing yourself to be undisciplined and unruly in the way that you are, maybe with patterns that are not conducive to good health, are you being compassionate by allowing yourself to, have another cake or do the thing that's not helping you? In the light of you being aware of that, there are areas that we're always oblivious to, but the minute that you know better, self-compassion is recognizing that you also need to do better. Another question, another thing that we can look at is thinking about what can you do to balance self-compassion with the motivation to grow and achieve goals. And in that, when you have a deadline on yourself, you want to achieve something by a certain point in time, are you allowing yourself also the opportunity to rest so that you can meet that in a way that is fair? Or are you completely wringing yourself out and wearing yourself out? How can you be compassionate to yourself about the fact that, one, you've set a goal, you're working towards a goal, you're being disciplined in that goal, but then you're not just wearing yourself thin in the attainment of that, or in the moments that you need to take some time out, not coming hard on yourself for being human. And when we're practicing self-compassion, it's finding a way that we can be compassionate, but also noticing the areas that we need to grow and improve. The idea of self-compassion is always about finding that balance of moving forward, finding those areas where things actually really do need to change, things do need to improve. We need to maybe look at the way that we're living our lives, the people in our lives, the behaviors that we are allowing, the people pleasing that we continue to do. How is that actually serving us in the long run? Self-compassion is putting a line down on areas where you think, okay, no more. If it was a friend, if you were witnessing a friend doing the thing that you're allowing yourself to do, or being in a situation that you're allowing yourself to remain in, if that was your friend, would you sit idly by and not at least make it known that you were aware of something that was happening that may need to shift in their life? And also as well, for some people, they find it difficult to then actually be compassionate, to be loving and kind to themselves. It's like a level of deservedness. How can you start to overcome any part of yourself that you may be feeling some resistance to being kind to yourself, in that you're feeling that you don't deserve what you're trying to give to yourself, or even in allowing yourself to be gentle and kind to yourself? Are you noticing that something about it just feels off, that you don't feel comfortable being loving to yourself? If those are aspects that keep turning up for us, then we need to look at why. Why is it so difficult to allow ourselves to be loving to ourselves? Why is it so difficult for us to be our own best friend? Where did that come from? What messaging are we allowing to rule that behavior? What areas, what beliefs are we still holding that makes us think that being compassionate is not what we deserve. And when we're practicing self-compassion as well, and we're beginning to feel into what self-compassion feels like and noticing the shifts that it makes in our life, the ease and the peace that it's bringing into our life. Things that may come up for us is why didn't I do this sooner? Like, why have I been making my life so difficult? And yeah, these are valid questions to ask, but then there comes a point of we need to then forgive ourselves for the time that we weren't gentle with ourselves. For whatever reason, maybe it's a belief, again, going back to the previous point, there was a belief that we held about our worthiness around that. Maybe it felt uncomfortable to be kind to ourselves. So again, it's like, why did we hold on to that for so long? Who were we and what situation were we in that allowed us to continue to repeat that pattern of pain around ourselves, and then forgive ourselves for allowing that to continue for the amount of time that it continued, and then move on from that and realize that you've made a bold move, a strong move to move into self-compassion, and for self-compassion to be a regular daily practice. And again, when it comes to balance, our balance about wanting to expand, wanting to grow, wanting to change, and then not falling back into abject complacency because we're labeling it as compassion and self-compassion. Again, compassion, I think, in comparison to last week where radical self-honesty was power, to me, compassion, what I'm recognizing in self-compassion is a balance of kindness, but a balance also of accountability and boundary and force and forward moving and attainment and power to move forward and shift and change without overrunning ourselves, but then not getting to the point where we almost lean back into non-action. And again, to reference Kristin Neff, one of the things that she talks about when it comes to when we start to practice self-compassion, she speaks of backdraft and the fact that a pain will actually increase at first. So it's almost like you open the door and then all the pain comes out first before the compassion can come in. The love goes in, but the old pain comes out. And a couple of sayings that describe that process are, when we give ourselves unconditional love, we discover the conditions under which we were unloved. Love reveals everything unlike itself. So it's feeling into that, feeling into the surprise of that, maybe even the shame of that we allowed ourselves to be under the thumb of a lack of compassion from ourselves, and then getting back into that forgiveness. And when it comes to our health and our well-being, self-compassion and practicing self-compassion has so many benefits for emotional well-being, mental health and relationships, because then it starts to help us reduce any feelings of anxiety that we may be suffering with, reduces stress and aspects of depression that we may be encountering. It then increases our resilience. It improves our self-esteem and just the way that we feel about ourselves and the way that we feel about our lives. We start to develop more satisfaction in who we are, how we're being, and what we're able to produce in our lives and in the world. And when it's in our spiritual growth, it's then encouraging more self-awareness, encouraging more self-forgiveness, encouraging more acceptance. And with that, we start to develop a much deeper connection with ourselves and then with others, and then expanding out into the world around us. Self-compassion, as I'm seeing it, when we find that balance, is just an enhancement of our journey to being more of ourselves, to find that place of peace within ourselves, because we get to know ourselves on such a profound level. And to close out, during the course of our day, there are moments when we can just consider, can we be more compassionate in that moment? If we think about times in our day where we may feel rising moments of guilt or shame, just to ask ourselves, is it valid in that moment to hold on to that feeling? How can we just soften the way that we are feeling about ourselves? How can we be gentler? Noticing moments when we have guilt or shame and just asking ourselves in that moment, is it valid to hold that feeling? And what can we do to shift that? And if there is a moment where it's something that we have done that we don't feel proud about, or it's a memory that's come back that feels like it's haunting us, is to just really sit with that feeling and remember what it is that made us make that decision, make that action at that particular point in time. Remember who it was that we were and why we did that. And hopefully, for the most part, we do things because we believe it's the best at any given time. Obviously, we don't always succeed at that, but to be gentle with yourself and know that to sit in guilt and shame perpetually is not going to help you or anybody. Just also noticing when you start to really start picking at yourself and think about things that you call weaknesses, your flaws, or any areas that you feel inadequate, or you're describing or thinking of yourself as someone who's unlovable. Again, bring in moments of self-compassion. Be compassionate with yourself in that moment. You deserve the softness. Remember, we're seeing ourselves as our friend, as our best friend. Why should we do that to each other? Why would you beat on yourself so hard if you're feeling low? If your friend is feeling low about themselves, the last thing you're going to do is go and sit by them and join in the hate fest. So what would you do if you were being your friend at that moment? And even thinking that you can do this tough love thing, like shaming yourself into something, criticizing yourself as a way to maybe motivate yourself to shift and change your behavior. Again, just take a moment at that. And is that the way that you would treat your friend? Would you bully them into making a shift? Allow yourself to have negative feelings. Criticizing yourself is not being loving. It's understanding where those feelings come from. And anytime you're in the shoulds, they should have done this and should have done that. And, we know about the shoulds. So anytime the shoulds come up in force is a moment to recognize that this is a time that I need to be compassionate with myself. And to close, a quote from Louise L. Hay: "You can heal your life. Remember, you have been criticizing yourself for years and it hasn't worked. Try approving of yourself and see what happens." So thank you for listening. And again, if you're receiving value from this series and you want to go deeper, then I encourage you to join the mailing list to receive additional exclusive learning points for you to meditate, journal, contemplate as you're doing your self-work. And remember, you're going to receive the free Embody Her 6-day course alongside that as well. That's 3 steps closer to being the woman of your dreams. If you're ready to take the next step in your transformation and you want support, accountability, contact me to find out more about my personalized higher energetic resonance one-to-one spiritual life coaching program. My website is carolmaywhittick.com, carolmaewhittick.com. You can find me on Facebook, Carol May Whittick, Casmic on Instagram, CAZMICK. So until the next episode, have a great week. Thank you.